Mr. President, I really appreciate you recognizing me for a moment. This is actually, we're about to adjourn the Senate. Many senators will travel back to their home states to do work, to meet with constituents, to go forward. But something is happening tomorrow that I wanted to recognize, which is the graduation of this class of Senate pages. Many people watch the functioning of the Senate, and what draws attention is not many of the people that do the work of this place. We have an incredible parliamentary staff. We have incredible people that serve the different caucuses. We have incredible people who provide security to this place who often don't get the attention they deserve. Senators come and go, but one thing that stays consistent is the incredible human beings, the patriots who make this place work. I am humbled every day to meet people who so love the institution of the Senate that they have chosen to serve it. And Mr. President, I'm sure you can agree with me, they're not doing it for the pay, and they're not doing it for the glory. They do it for the love of country, and especially, in particular, the love of this institution. There's another group, though, that does come and go that I think play a very special role here, and that is about twice a year, then there's some summer pages, we see the pages come in from all over the country to serve this institution in a way that has been done for generations. And what's remarkable about them in their suits is that they are not young adults, they are teenagers who have made an irrational choice, in my opinion. They have decided to leave their high schools, their comfort, their technological devices, their extracurricular activities, their sports teams, their homes, and come and live in Washington, D.C., where the rigors of their lives are extraordinary. Literally, our Senate pages during the 2 sessions that are during the year, they are doing a full class of academics. They actually are studying difficult topics that I'm not sure how senators would do on calculus or chemistry, but they are taking a full load of classes, and then they are working the equivalent of a full-time job. And at times they're up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then they service this institution. And the jobs they do, I would say, are essential. In fact, if they were not here, the people that would have to do those jobs, the Senate would have to hire people to fill those roles. During my 10 years in the Senate, I have to say I've met some remarkable young people. They call them Democratic and Republican pages, but there is no partisanship here. These are patriots first who probably ascribe to many different ideals and parties, independents and what have you, but when they're here, they are participating in the Senate. I often say to Senate pages, it's an honor to have served in the United States Senate with you, and I mean that very meaningful when I talk to them. Now, on a personal note, I have to say the Senate pages endure me. I tell horrible jokes. I make it a goal to try to embarrass them on the floor of the Senate as often as I can. I try to get them to encroach the rules, never break them, just encroach them. But during my course of my time here, I have watched some of these young people blow me away with their intellect and their acumen, with their dedication and their knowledge, but most importantly, with their heart. I look at this class of pages right now as they are about to graduate and go on to do incredible things in life. How do I know this is now that with 10 years in this body, I bump into pages every once in a while. They try their best to pretend like they don't know me, but I call them out and I see them are doing great things. I now know Senate pages that have gone off to college, who have graduated from college, who have now gone into the work world and continue to distinguish themselves, not by having a common experience of serving in the Senate, but having taken the inspiration of working in this body into their work as American citizens and living a life of committed patriotism. And so to this class, I just want to say to you as well, it has been an honor to serve this institution with you. You all are some of the best of our nation. You have shown a grit and a guts while you were here, handling your coursework and the demands. You've dealt with some of the times the indignities of being treated like you are wallpaper. But the truth of the matter is, you guys have risen in service through your course and your experience here. For that, on behalf of this entire body, I want to give you my thanks. And I want to encourage you to think of yourselves as always a part of this body. Lots of people have passed through here. We've had former pages become United States senators. We have former pages that sit on that dais now. I hope you will always consider this not just your capital, but also your community. And I look forward to seeing you all about in the world. And I hope, for old time's sake, you'll at least let me tell you one bad dad joke. With that, I yield the floor. With that, I ask unanimous consent to submit a list of names of the pages to the record. I would like to put, without objection?
Without objection.
And I'd like the congressional record to say that the junior senator from New Jersey, told them that they're great people, but they need better senses of humor.
Without objection.
Thank you. If there is no further business to come before the United States Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 3 p.m. on Monday.
I'd like to ask consent. I know we have an order to vote at 1:45 to speak for about 5 minutes.
Without objection.
And then secondly, Mr. President, I have not 4, not 5, but 6 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval, thankfully, of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, this Saturday, March 18th, will mark the 60th anniversary of the unanimous and landmark Supreme Court decision in Gideon v. Wainwright, which held that every American has the constitutional right in criminal cases, regardless of their wealth and where they were born. They have a right fundamentally to public defense system that we know today. Before Gideon was decided, people accused of crimes were left to fend for themselves, having to navigate arraignments, plea bargains, jury decisions, trials, cross-examination of witnesses. Every part of the criminal prosecution, they had to do it themselves while facing government prosecutors who had the legal upper hand. Clarence Earl Gideon was a 51-year-old with an 8th grade education who ran away from home in middle school. History describes him as a drifter who spent time in and out of prison for non-violent crimes. But history would also come to know him as someone who fundamentally transformed our legal system so that any person without resources accused of a crime has a due process right to a fair trial. And you can't have a fair trial without counsel. In 1961, Gideon was arrested for stealing $5 in change and beer, allegedly doing so from the Bay Harbor pool room in Panama City, Florida. As James Baldwin would write at the same time as Gideon's arrest, anyone who has ever struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor. Gideon, who had spent much of his life in poverty, was too poor to hire an attorney and asked the trial court to appoint one for him. The court denied his request, saying that only indigent defenders facing the death penalty are entitled to a lawyer. Gideon assumed the burden of defending himself at trial, becoming his own lawyer. He made an opening statement to the jury, cross-examined the prosecution's witnesses. He presented witnesses in his own defense. He declined to testify himself and made arguments emphasizing his innocence. Despite his valiant efforts, the jury found Gideon guilty of this $5 theft, and he was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. But Gideon felt he had been fundamentally deprived of his due process rights. Determined to prove his innocence, Gideon penciled a 5-page handwritten petition asking the 9 justices of the Supreme Court to consider his case. And against all odds, the Supreme Court granted Gideon's petition. Gideon would tell the Supreme Court, "It makes no difference how old I am or what color I am or which church I belong to, if any. The question is, I did not get a fair trial. The question's very simple. I requested the court appoint me an attorney, and the court refused. In the court's unanimous decision,
They held that reason and reflection require us to recognize that in our adversarial system of criminal justice, any person hauled into court who is too poor to hire a lawyer cannot be assured a fair trial unless counsel is provided for him. Gideon's case was sent back to the lower court where he had a lawyer to defend him. It took the jury only 1 hour to come to a verdict and acquit him. From that time on, the public defense system as we know it today came into existence. Folks who couldn't afford a lawyer 60 years ago are now guaranteed basic legal protection. Public defenders play a sacrosanct role in our society. Every one of America's public defenders embarks on the noble work that is the cornerstone of our legal system, ensuring that every citizen has a right to a fair trial, every citizen has access to justice within the justice system. Yet the promise of Gideon, the promise of this decision still remains unfulfilled. The public defense system is under such strain that in many places it barely functions. Justice Black declared that lawyers in criminal courts are necessities, not luxuries. But too often across our country, adequate legal representation is a luxury only afforded to those who are wealthy enough to hire a lawyer. Despite their important and essential work to the cause of justice, public defenders carry crushing caseloads that strain their ability to meet their legal and ethical obligations to provide effective representation. According to a 2019 Brennan Center report, only 27% of county-based and 21% of state-based public defender offices have enough attorneys to adequately handle their caseloads. There are counties and states in America where public defenders are responsible for more than 200 cases at one time. The quality of public defenders also varies from state to state, town to town, case to case. Compared to prosecutors and other attorneys, public defenders are woefully under-resourced and underpaid. That's why today, with my friend and colleague from Illinois, Senator Durbin, I'm introducing the Providing a Quality Defense Act to provide funding to local governments to hire more public defenders so that those accused of crimes can receive adequate representation. The bill will provide funding to increase salaries for public defenders so that they can have pay parity with the prosecutors that they face. It will require the Department of Justice to conduct evidence-based studies and make recommendations for appropriate caseloads for public defenders and for adequate compensation. Public defenders don't just represent their clients with zealous advocacy, they get to know their clients and see the impacts of convictions on their families and loved ones. The experience is invaluable and helps to inform sentencing should there be a conviction. However, unlike the majority of state sentencing commissions, the U.S. Sentencing Commission, an independent agency tasked with establishing sentencing policies and practices for the federal court, lacks a representative from a public defender background who would provide an essential perspective on the criminal justice system. Today, again, along with Senator Durbin, I am reintroducing the Sentencing Commission Improvements Act to add a member of the U.S. Sentencing Commission with a public defender background who will bring a new and valuable perspective to the commission. I urge my colleagues to support both of these bills, which will bring us one step closer to a justice system that is fairer, more humane, and more just. Such a criminal justice system is part of the legacy of a so-called drifter, a 51-year-old who spoke truth to power, who challenged a system that seemed impossible to beat, who challenged the very idea of what it means to have a just justice system. If the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, then Clarence Earl Gideon is one of the arc benders. Thank you.
Under the previous order
from New Jersey.
I am grateful to the presiding officer
for recognizing me. I want to say that I'm excited to be standing up tonight and talking as along with Senator Wyden, Senator Hassan, and you just heard from Senator Casey, who is marking this 13th anniversary celebration with extraordinary determination not to see these great programs cut. I was not in Congress when the ACA was passed into law, but in an affirmation of that old adage about politics being local, I saw in my local community of Newark, New Jersey, the powerful difference that the ACA made, the difference that health reform had on my community. Folks would come up to me immediately in the months and years afterwards and talk about how they were finally able to get the health care that they needed, not only for themselves, but for their loved ones, how they moved from anxiety and fear to security and strength. You had folks with pre-existing conditions who were discriminated against in the United States of America before the law's passage. But now they had a pathway for quality, affordable health care. Folks who had to choose often between putting food on the table, paying rent, or just visiting a doctor. A choice between buying school supplies and getting their prescription drugs. Choices that in this nation, the richest nation on the planet Earth, are outrageous and unacceptable and fiscally irresponsible, because what I saw as Newark's mayor is that often people would let their health care needs go until they ended up in the emergency room, which was a cost then borne by them and their family for unnecessary illness, but also to all of us. This should not be the nation we live in, and we are celebrating the fact that 13 years ago, this body made a difference. I've seen this passion for the Affordable Care Act echoed in my 9 years as a United States Senator. One of my constituents told me, as a registered nurse from New Jersey, she spent her entire professional life caring for patients. Before the ACA, she witnessed those in need delay or simply refuse health care until it was too late. Soon, though, she almost became one of those patients herself after she retired and confronted her own health challenges and their accompanying costs. It was only thanks to the Affordable Care Act that she didn't have to resort to emptying her retirement accounts in order to afford the health care. She said it best herself. The Affordable Care Act, she said simply, quote, saved my life. Another constituent of mine, a recent widow, wrote to me a few years ago. After losing her husband, she relied on the marketplace to get insurance, the Affordable Care Act's marketplace. She was diabetic, had pre-existing conditions, and told me, quote, I'm afraid of having no coverage. I could lose my home and everything I've saved during my 35-year marriage. Now, despite the partisan attacks that you hear against the Affordable Care Act, despite the challenges in the courts, we know the Affordable Care Act has worked. The data is clear. From 2010 to 2021, the number of uninsured, non-elderly individuals has decreased substantially in the United States of America, from 46.5 million to 27.5 million. That number has been nearly cut in half. We also know that the ACA has been invaluable in the fight to achieve just greater healthcare justice by dramatically decreasing the uninsured rate for many ethnic minorities in our countries. For example, those rates have gone from 20% uninsured in 2010 to just 11% in 2021. For Black folks, 33% to 19%. For Latino folks, 17% to 6%. We have seen a dramatic decrease for Asian Americans, Latino Americans, Black Americans, and more. The law has saved lives. Unequivocally, a 2014 study showed that the ACA prevented an estimated 50,000 preventable patient deaths in just 3 years, from 2010 to 2013. And in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, the ACA marketplace was a lifeline to folks who were laid off and had no insurance. One of the most important things that this law has done is to get people insured, to reduce deaths, to lower healthcare costs, and to expand access to Medicaid to people who were previously ineligible. I live in a state that was one of the first to extend Medicaid to more of our citizens. We did it under a Republican governor who recognized just how important it was that we expand Medicaid, how life-saving it was, how good for the empowerment of families and children it was. It's helped so many more people in New Jersey obtain health insurance and has helped my state fight the opioid crisis by providing us the vital resources to do so. New Jersey is one of 39 states, plus the District of Columbia, that has chosen to expand Medicaid. By all accounts, these 39 states with Medicaid expansion are outperforming those who have inexplicitly, one might say outrageously, chosen to reject Medicaid expansion despite the overwhelming evidence that it helps countless Americans stay healthier and better access quality, affordable care. Perhaps that's one reason why the state of North Carolina, with a Republican-led legislature and a Democratic governor, are in the middle of a bipartisan process to expand Medicaid in their state right now as we speak. States that expanded Medicaid have continuously shown to lower uninsured rates, to lower premiums on exchange policies, to have lower mortality rates. States that have expanded Medicaid better live up to the ideals of this country, that fundamentally we are about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Expanding healthcare access lowers death rates. It is about life. Expanding healthcare access is about liberty, freeing people from fear and anxiety, from being chained to the worry that comes from not being able to afford even an ambulance ride. And ultimately, it's about happiness. People in these states are going to the doctor more often for preventative screening, visiting the dentists for dental care, getting mental health treatment. They have seen an increase in early-stage cancer diagnosis when cancer is more treatable. People in those states have lower medical debt than in states that have neglected to expand Medicaid. It's actually had a positive effect on the overall economy. And I've led the charge to make sure that those states which expand Medicaid also provide coverage for birthing people, for moms, for a year postpartum. We live in a country that shamefully has a maternal mortality rate that is far higher than our peer nations, and especially higher for marginalized communities. New data was recently released showing a significant increase in the maternal mortality rate in 2021. This problem is getting worse, with maternal mortality rates nearly doubling in the United States since 2018. The maternal mortality rate is bad for all Americans, and it's even worse for African Americans. Given that Medicaid coverage covers half the births in the United States, the continuing expansion of coverage and care will help address these concerning trends and address those disparities and help ensure that more women can get access to the reproductive care that they need, and we can have more healthy births with healthy moms. The bottom line is clear. Medicaid is integral to helping Americans get the care they need and to affirm our common values. We love our children in this nation, and the data for their births for the children and their mothers should reflect that love. What does love look like in public? It looks like justice. It looks like healthy children being born. It looks like lowering the death rates for women giving birth. Look, we have much work to do. We should note the progress on this 13th anniversary. We should
stop the politicization of healthcare in this country when we make strides that belie all the outrageous claims that were made about what the Affordable Care Act would turn into. All of the lies that were said about this legislation, all the dire predictions have not come true. Look, when I think about the ACA, I think back to the night I sat with my dear friend John Lewis, a hero to people on both sides of the aisle in this chamber, a truly great American. When the Affordable Care Act was in crisis and threatened to be repealed, we sat on the Capitol steps, opened up a Facebook Live, and started having a conversation. I'll never forget, hundreds of people came to join us on the steps of the Capitol. And I'll never forget that John Lewis made it clear to this large crowd of people and to a live online audience. He said, affordable health care is the birthright of every American. At stake is not just the details of policy, but the character of our country. Think about that for a second, the character of our country. Who are we? What do we stand for? Not just those unbelievable words on those founding documents, not just the spirit of America, but in truth, you can judge the greatness of a country by the well-being of its people. I believe that when we talk about healthcare, we aren't just talking about policy and legislation and politics, but we're talking about the very fabric, the moral fabric of this nation. We cannot be a nation that stands for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if people don't have access to what is fundamental to those ideals, which is quality health care. We are a nation that should be a beacon to the world. I believe we are. We are a nation of promise, a nation of hope, a nation of possibility, a nation of infinite potential. But there are still too many people in this country where that potential and that possibility is undermined by the mere fact that they cannot access a doctor, preventative care, birthing care. That is wrong. I am endlessly grateful for the Affordable Care Act, for helping us to make a stride towards our ideals, for bending the arc of the moral universe more towards justice, to making this a more perfect union. Yes, tonight is a 13th year anniversary, but we should commit ourselves to going from doing good work, from making progress, to ultimately doing what we are called to be, which is a nation that is a light unto all nations, that sets the highest standards for health care and health outcomes, that we are not a nation that proclaims a nation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but demonstrates it relative to our other nations in the true fabric of our living. That is a cause that calls this body and the House of Representatives and our federal government. It should call us not just to celebrate a 13th year anniversary, but to continue to improve upon the good work that was done. Mr. President, I'm concluded with my remarks. I am just a warm-up act for the senator that is coming right now from my second favorite new state after New Jersey, the great state of New Hampshire. I yield.
I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to speak for 11 minutes, followed by Senator Grassley for 10 minutes and Senator Menendez for 5 minutes prior to the scheduled vote.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. The senator from New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to speak about another public health crisis. I feel a little bit like I'm in this horrific version of Groundhog Day because I've come to the floor of the Senate to speak about this crisis time and time again. This is a public health crisis that's happening only in America. A public health crisis that's impacting every community in this country, whether it's a rural town called Uvalde a movie theater in Aurora, a school in Nashville, the uniquely American crisis of gun violence. If you love this country, I will tell you, if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. This is heart-wrenching. A specifically, uniquely American epidemic. And so I stand here on the Senate floor, heartbroken like so many Americans, and share this sense of obligation that we speak as a nation after a mass shooting, that we don't treat this like business as usual. Decades ago, in this body, if 8 people were shot and killed, I think we should share a sense of outrage with our heartbreak. That in the face of almost daily reportings of gun violence victims, many of them innocent children, we have failed to respond to this crisis. Instead, we choose the pathway of inaction, or choosing a pathway where the action is in no way proportionate to the crisis. We've allowed carnage in our country to persist, and we have chosen to value the power of wealth and special interests to overcome the majority will of a nation. It seems so common now to turn on the TV and see yet again Americans being slaughtered in our nation. This past Saturday, that place was a shopping mall. It was in the suburbs of Dallas, where a shooter opened fire on shoppers with an AR-15 style rifle. We're still learning more about this event, but the early reports indicate that at least 8 lives have been lost and numerous others wounded, lives shattered, crippled by weapons that belong in a war zone, firing bullets that rip through bodies with gruesome reality. Victims from their 60s to a child that is 5 years old. Only in America, only in America, only in this country is something like this routine. 8 people killed, and we continue with a growing savage normalcy that just accepts this carnage. 8 more souls. 8 more. Every time one of these shootings happens, we go through the same motions. It's almost beginning to seem like autopilot. I see the same tweets. I see the same moans. I see similar statements. And then we seem to get to a point where it leaves the headlines just to be replaced by another slaughter, by another shooting, by another mass murder, by another child dying, by another kid without his parents. We seem to have resigned ourselves to this cycle of carnage. And the responses are thoughts and prayers. As the death toll climbs, thoughts and prayers as more people die, thoughts and prayers as more people are put into the ground, thoughts and prayers as more families and communities and places of worship and places of commerce are forever remembered as the place where family members, friends, and loved ones died. Only in America. Only in America. Only in America.
yesterday, May 8th, was the 128th day of the year. In those 128 days, there have been 201 mass shootings. In those 128 days, more than 14,000 Americans have been killed by gun violence. In 128 days, there have been 12,000 Americans who've been injured, many of them crippled, many of them with forever scars on their bodies and trauma to their souls. This staggering toll includes people that weren't shot in mass shootings. We just had a 14-year-old girl shot because she was playing hide and seek, shot in the back of the head because she went on someone else's property. Or what about the young black boy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, mistakenly ringing the wrong doorbell only to be shot and traumatized for the rest of his life? Or what about the toddler? The toddler shot in the head after a gun fell off a shelf. As of 2018, we have seen an explosion of gun purchases in the United States. We now have 390 million guns in circulation, which means there's more guns in this nation right now than there are people. In my lifetime alone, just the short 50-plus years of my life, more Americans have been killed by gun violence in the United States than all of our wars, from the Revolutionary War, through the World Wars, through the Vietnam War, through the Korean War, through the War on Terror, than all of our wars combined. There have more people in our country been killed by gun violence in the last 50 years. And every single day that this body does nothing, another 120 people die. Only in America. Only in America. We have gun death rates that are 8 times higher than our northern neighbor Canada, 22 times higher than the European Union, 23 times higher than Australia. Only in America. Only in America. 58% of us now, more than half of Americans now, more than half of American adults have someone they care for that has experienced gun violence. This creeping reality is eating into everyone in America. It's now the leading cause of premature death in the United States and the leading cause of death for our children. The number one killer of American children is gun violence. Only in America. Only in America is the number one cause of death for children, gun violence. Nearly 19% of childhood deaths in 2021 were caused by firearms. Only in America. No other comparable country are firearms with even in the top 4 causes of mortality amongst children. Our kids are being forced to do active shooter drills, more so now than fire drills. Being forced to hold hands, to be taught to escape, to be taught to hide, to be implicitly told by adults that we can't protect you from the number one cause of death. And what is this doing to a society? More than the deaths even is the trauma that is creeping like a cancer into all parts of our society. What is it doing to our collective hearts? What is it doing to our one nation under God that this cancer of trauma is entering neighborhoods and communities and towns and cities? What does it mean? Well, research on trauma shows that the level of collective trauma constitutes a cataclysmic event that affects not just victims of violence, but the society as a whole. It is a cancer. It undermines our fundamental sense of security. If you look at other countries that have suffered these same tragedies, that decided to act, that their collective response was to do something. Canada took steps to ban military-style assault weapons. New Zealand placed restrictions on AR-15s and other semi-automatic weapons. In Australia, they implemented a gun buyback program and other actions in their gun deaths. In country after country that took action, they affirmed their collective agency to protect their nation. They responded to tragedy with action, to trauma with healing. And yet, only in America, while other nations make progress, we choose to normalize trauma. And people make comments like, more guns. More guns will make us safer. People make comments like, oh, well, it's mental health issues when other nations have mental health crises. Some argue.
Has expired.
I ask unanimous consent for 3 more minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
We cannot profess to be a nation of freedom if we can't free our society from fear, if we can't free our society from violence. We cannot profess to live up to our values if the very nation founded for one of the reasons being common defense, but we can't defend our children. Last week, I introduced with Senator Warren the Firearm Safety Act, which would implement federal safety regulations for firearms, because right now guns, the most lethal of all consumer products, are the only products that aren't even subject to consumer safety regulations. Look, I want to end with the truth. A police officer who arrived at the shooting in Allentown recounted discovering a young boy beneath his mother's lifeless body, who died protecting this child. He shared with anguish the haunting encounter of finding a young girl also crouched in a prayer-like position as he searched for signs of a life. He turned her head to the side only to find the horror of her face missing. In her final moments on earth, the position of that girl was in prayer, was to pray. And we, in this country, only in America, our response is only thoughts and prayers. We need to be the prayer answerers. We need to be the ones that respond when people call out for help. How will we respond to this national nightmare? What will we do to this uniquely American problem? Will we show American might? Will we show American strength? Will we show American healing? Will we show American community? Will we show American love for our children? Or will we repeat this national nightmare over and over again? When the shots ring out, people run, people hide, people pray. It is time that we in America answer those prayers with action. Mr. President, thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to use a proper to during my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today I would like to talk about a distasteful subject to me. I get angry whenever I think about it. Fentanyl dealers. I hope there's a special place in hell for them. Fentanyl dealers. Today is National Fentanyl Awareness Day. Last year, fentanyl, or actually in 2021, fentanyl killed 71,000 Americans. If you break down these sterile statistics, you'll see that somebody in our country dies from fentanyl poisoning every 7 seconds. There ought to be a special place in hell for fentanyl dealers. And these aren't just sterile statistics, Mr. President. These are real people. And they have real families whose lives are torn apart. A lot of these deaths occur among young people. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for Americans who are 18 to 49. From 2020 to 2021, fentanyl deaths in our country increased by 24%. It was even more among young people. What you allow is what will continue. And today, this body, the United States Congress, allows fentanyl dealers to carry on their person, if they would like to, enough fentanyl to kill 20,000 Americans before they face a mandatory 5-year minimum sentence if they're caught. Until these fentanyl dealers have to deal themselves with real consequences, I think the carnage is going to continue. I have a bill. It's called the Fairness in Fentanyl Sentencing Act of 2023. And it will change what I just talked about drastically. It will reduce the amount of fentanyl that a fentanyl dealer has to possess before facing the mandatory minimum 5 years of prison. Now, Mr. President, I know you know this, but when you're dealing with fentanyl, the amounts really matter. Fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. Not 5, not 15, 50 times more potent. It takes only 2 milligrams to kill you. Here's a pencil. Here's the point of a pencil. The amount of fentanyl you can put on the point of a pencil will kill you. Let me say that again. The amount of fentanyl that you can put on the point of a pencil will kill you. Today, fentanyl dealers can carry up to 40 grams of fentanyl before they face the mandatory minimum 5 years of prison. And with me today, Mr. President, is one of my colleagues, Mr. Wesley Davis, who's also a good lawyer, I might add. This is 40 grams of fentanyl. It's not actually fentanyl, it's flour. But if the flour were fentanyl, this would be 40 grams. You can have this much. You have to have this much before you get a minimum 5-year sentence. And remember, the pencil, enough to go on the head of that goes on the head of a pencil can kill you. But you've got to have this much. I don't know how many pencil points this is, but it's a lot. You've got to have this much to get a minimum 5-year sentence. 40 grams. It would kill 20,000 people. This amount will kill every member of this body 200 times over. Every member of this body 200 times over. And thanks to us and the laws that we pass, the fentanyl dealer would just get a minimum 5-year sentence. See that other bag. Now this bag has 400 grams in it. It's flour, but fentanyl would represent the same thing. This has 400 grams. You have to have 400 grams, given the laws that we have passed, to face a mandatory 10-year sentence. 400 grams will kill 200,000 people, dead as a doornail. Shreveport, Louisiana, in my state, some of you have been there. If you haven't, you should visit, is home to 184,000 people. So a dealer has to have 400 grams, an amount that would kill every man, woman, and child in Shreveport, 400 grams, in order to get a mandatory 10-year sentence. Now, these sentencing guidelines do not reflect how much damage can be done with just a little bit of fentanyl. For example, fentanyl dealers face the 5-year mandatory minimum sentence if they had 5 grams of amphetamine. Here's my chart here. To get a minimum of 5 years in prison, you have to have just 5 grams of methamphetamine. But you have to have 40 grams of fentanyl, which is 50 times more powerful than heroin. I mean, does that make any sense to anyone? Now, meth's a bad drug. I'm not defending meth. But it's not nearly as lethal as fentanyl. This stuff will kill you. And people deal with it every day in America. They deal it every day, and they're not facing consequences. In 2021, in fact, meth killed less than half as many people as fentanyl. Yet fentanyl dealers, I don't want to call them traffickers because that sounds too tame to me, too beige. They're dealers. They're drug dealers. They're death dealers. Fentanyl dealers can possess 8 times as much fentanyl before facing the same mandatory minimum sentence as somebody who's dealing meth. We need a sentencing scheme that looks like somebody designed the damn thing on purpose. Now, we need to have a criminal code that reflects fentanyl's lethal force. My bill, the Fairness in Fentanyl Sentencing Act of 2023, is pretty simple. It will cut the fentanyl threshold for the 5-year mandatory minimum sentence from 40 grams to 2 grams. From 40 grams to 2 grams. Now, you're not going to have 2 grams of fentanyl on you unless you're dealing. It would reduce the legal threshold for fentanyl analogs as well. Fentanyl analogs, these are synthetic copycats of fentanyl. And actually, they can be even more lethal than pure fentanyl itself, these analogs. Today, if a dealer can carry up to 10 grams of fentanyl analogs, today, I should say, a dealer can carry up to 10 grams of fentanyl analogs before facing the 5-year mandatory minimum sentence, and my bill would drop that threshold down to half a gram. By doing this, Mr. President, my bill helps our criminal code reflect the reality that fentanyl is not like other drugs. It's not. I mean, as bad as meth is, as bad as PCP is, as bad as crack cocaine is, as bad as heroin is, as bad as powdered cocaine is, fentanyl is in a class by itself. The drug cartels who operate south of our border, have found that fentanyl is a cheap way to cut corners and to make more money. They use fentanyl to make other drugs. They put fentanyl into cocaine, they put it into heroin, which makes the final concoction cheaper and more powerful. Today, everything from marijuana to Adderall can be laced with lethal amounts of fentanyl on the black market. It gives the concoction more kick, and the drug dealers make more money, which is all they care about. And if the drug dealers don't measure it right, it'll kill you. Now look, we all know that young people experiment. And many young people, I dare say most young people, are going to try drugs. When my son, who I love more than life itself, was a youngster, he's no longer young. Well, he's young. I consider you and I young, Mr. President. But when my son was growing up, he's now a grown man, I would lecture him about drugs, and I'd say, don't use them. I knew he was going to try them, but I'd say, don't use them. He said, Dad, why? You get addicted. You get addicted. And I was always terrified that my son would get addicted, would fall in with the wrong crowd. That conversation today is different for parents with young teenagers. Now it's you can't even try it once, not fentanyl. You can't even try LSD or meth or PCP or crack cocaine or heroin or powder cocaine. You know why? Because it might have fentanyl in it. The drug dealers cut these products with fentanyl. And if they put too much in it, you get one shot. One shot. Forget addiction. The first time a young person experiments might be the last. Now, my state of Louisiana, like every other state in this country, has seen the carnage of fentanyl. We all have. In 2021, 94% of drug overdose deaths in New Orleans were related to what? Fentanyl. In Louisiana, we call our counties parishes. Our coroner's office in East Baton Rouge Parish investigated 300 overdose deaths. 88% of them last year were linked to fentanyl. In the average month in St. Tammany Parish, or county, where I live, we lose 10 or 11 people just about every month. 10 or 11 young people usually to fentanyl overdoses. And why? These aren't people just taking fentanyl. These are people taking other drugs that drug dealers, each of whom should be assigned a special place in hell, other dealers are cutting with fentanyl to give the concoction a higher high to make more money. And if they measure wrong and put too much fentanyl in it, you get to try their product one time, and then you're dead. These are sons. These are daughters. These are friends. These are co-workers. And every one of them has a family. Now, while our families and our kids are suffering, the cartels and the drug dealers who help them in America are getting rich. There was a recent report from the Department of Justice, Mr. President. It stated that fentanyl dealing is one of the Sinaloa cartel's most lucrative endeavors. That cartel is led by 3 of El Chapo's sons. We're not talking choir boys here. They have made a boatload of money selling poison to our children. But it's not just them. It's dealers in the United States as well. Our Customs and Border Protection officers are working as hard as they can to stop drugs from coming into this country. But their hands are tied by our bad policies. More people have crossed the border in the last year than at any time in the history of ever. That's a fact. More than 5 million people have entered this country illegally under President Biden, during the Biden administration. I only have 4.6 million people in Louisiana. So imagine just us adding another state the size of Louisiana. And the problem is expected to get worse. As we know, Title 42 expires next week. And more people will be coming in. But it's not just folks who are coming into our country illegally. And let me say, I don't hate migrants. I don't hate immigrants. I love immigrants. I mean, we're a nation of immigrants, but we have a legal immigration system, and we ought to follow it. And most Americans, they distinguish between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And if you support legal immigration, as I do, and oppose illegal immigration, that doesn't make you a racist, as some people think. The American people oppose illegal immigration and support legal immigration for the same reason they lock their front doors at night. Most Americans don't lock their front doors at night because they hate everybody on the outside. They do it because they love people on the inside, and they want to know who's coming in and out. And they're happy to welcome. I'm happy to welcome Nigerian doctors and German engineers and whomever to come into our country legally. But vetting people at the border is not racist, it's prudent. But a lot comes across that border, and not just people. A lot of fentanyl does as well. In 2022, the Customs and Border Protection seized 14,000 pounds of fentanyl, a 127% increase from the previous year. That's enough fentanyl to kill every man, every woman, every child in the United States. Now, we've got to show the cartels and the people in America, in our communities who are dealing this stuff, that there are consequences for poisoning people, and especially young people. I've also introduced a bill called the Notorious, Aggressive, Remorseless Criminal Organizations and Syndicates Act of 2023. It's known as the Narcos Act. It'll designate these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And we need to give our border agents the resources to secure the border and to stop these dealers before they set foot in our country. But let me return to the Fairness in Fentanyl and Sentencing Act of 2023. It's not going to solve the problem, Mr. President, but it's a start. Dealers carrying enough fentanyl to kill a small town deserve to face a minimum mandatory sentence of 5 years. And they deserve to be punished more severely than someone carrying meth or PCP or crack cocaine, because fentanyl is in a class by itself. And without serious prison sentences for these drug dealers who put money over human life, we're not going to make progress. A 5-year prison sentence can close one stream of fentanyl into our communities, and it might deter the next person who's looking to make a quick buck while trafficking this poison. I want to be clear. I'm almost done, Mr. President. My bill is not looking to punish addicts. My bill will not punish addicts. Now, I believe in free will and responsibility. But I also think that there are mitigating circumstances in the nitty-gritty of life. And that's why if you're an addict and you're convicted of a crime, a serious crime, a judge will consider mitigating circumstances like addiction. I wouldn't wish addiction on my worst enemy. This bill isn't about addiction. A lot of these people don't even take their own product. This is about people, fentanyl dealers, who deal death every day to make money. And there ought to be a special place in hell for them. And this Congress, this Senate, punishes them less than we punish somebody dealing meth. Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 878 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, Mr. President, I ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, the senator from Louisiana is a friend and someone who is, as he said, angry about these issues. That passion is real. His anger, his frustration, his determination is something that I share. In fact, I think this is one of the issues that if you polled 100 senators, you would see 100 senators who sincerely and urgently believe we need to do something with this crisis that the senator from Louisiana has so patently and clearly and candidly put forward. The fentanyl crisis is killing Americans at outrageous rates. Doing nothing or continuing to do the same thing is absolutely unacceptable. So my colleague, his passion, Louisianans should know that this is one of the best fighters when it comes to protecting people in his state, and his passion for protection affects people all over this country. But this is the challenge I have. We have now seen generations of the so-called war on drugs. And the solutions that we seem to come up with are about more and more and more incarceration. Longer and longer and longer sentences. And if that would solve the problem, count me in for continuing to go down that pathway. We now incarcerate more people than any country on the planet Earth. 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are here in America. 1 out of every 4 incarcerated people in the world are here in America. But has that stopped the crisis of drugs in our communities, kids dying of fentanyl, of opioids? No, there is no correlation. Not one study, nothing shows that higher and higher rates, higher and higher sentencing relates in any way to safer and safer communities. And I have looked for that data. The Department of Justice itself, the folks who are prosecuting people for drugs, their own report from the National Institute of Justice says more severe punishments do not chasten individuals convicted of these crimes. It has no correlation at all. And yet, as my colleagues pointed out, every 7 seconds someone is dying. And so the question is what will make the difference? My colleague, if you follow the evidence that you so passionately talked about on this day, National Fentanyl Awareness Day, the things that we know are actually driving down the deaths, are treating this issue like a national health crisis. Yes, we need law enforcement. Yes, we need to stop this fentanyl coming into our country. Yes, the law enforcement needs all the tools. I support them. I will fight for them. I will continue to invest in them. But what's lacking to save lives is the kind of healthcare access that we need: drug treatment, awareness, public health interventions. We know those work, but yet we don't have the resources in communities to do them. I bring your attention to some of the facts. National Institute of Health reports that 85% of our prison population right now, think about that, the overwhelming majority of our prison population right now has an active substance use disorder. Incarcerated, or people incarcerated involving drug use. That's who we're incarcerating in America right now, folks coming in and out, getting further and further engaged in that dark world of drug abuse and drug sales, but we're not solving the problem. Let me bring attention to the fact that when it comes to sentencing, my colleague was talking about the mandatory minimums, but you know what? You get caught with possession. I know this. You get tagged with possession with intent to distribute. God, if you're in a school zone, you get tagged with something else. We have prosecutors now that could stack up 20, 30, 40, 50 years, even more so. I don't know if folks know this, but on your first offense, possession with intent to distribute, 5-year mandatory minimum, but you could be given up to 40 years. The second offense in the United States of America, you could get a life sentence. The mandatory minimum is 10 years to life. Is that stopping the crisis in our country? Do we need to bring in the death penalty? Is that going to stop what's happening in every 7 seconds? 30 years I've lived in Newark. 25 years to be exact. And God, I've watched the drug war and what it's done. More mandatory minimums, more incarceration, and lives that continue to be destroyed by the horrors of drugs. I beg this body to look at the evidence of what actually saves lives. Did you know the number one reason why people don't call for help when someone is having a drug overdose is because they're afraid of the consequences when they engage with the police? People are dying right now because people are afraid of the police, because we're treating this like just a law enforcement problem and not a public health problem. I will join with any colleague on either side of the aisle to stop the scourge of fentanyl taking too many of our children. But God, follow the evidence and let's work together on what we see is actually lowering causes, lowering the rates of death. So, yes, I object with a heart that is hurting, with the same anger that my colleague has shown. I will work with him. We've worked together before. Let's do something that is a comprehensive approach, that follows the data, that follows the report, that follows the National Institute of Health and the DOJ's best recommendations. I will join with him, and we'll bring to a floor a comprehensive bill that does affect fentanyl coming into our country, overwhelmingly being brought by Americans, that does affect law enforcement's capabilities and powers to detect those substances, as I found out on the border, that does impact the addicts that he so passionately and compassionately cares about. Let's do a comprehensive bill, not something that the data does not support will actually stop children from dying like they have died in the many seconds that I've talked. I object.
Objection is heard. Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I listened carefully to my good friend Senator Booker's remarks, and I appreciate them. Let me make 2 or 3. Let me start over. I listened very carefully to my friend Senator Booker's remarks, and I appreciate them, and I thank him for his offer to work together, and I do want to work with him, but I want to make a couple of things clear. My bill doesn't deal with addiction. My bill deals with dealers. A pencil, the point of the pencil, enough heroin to fit on the point of a pencil will kill you dead. You're not walking around with 40 grams of fentanyl for your own personal use. You're going to deal it. You're going to cut other drugs with it. You're going to sell it to young people. Probably not even tell them fentanyl's in it. And you're not going to measure the fentanyl very carefully. If you get too much in it, somebody dies. There are others. Because if you can get them to take your meth with fentanyl, laced with fentanyl, given that fentanyl is 50 times more powerful, more addictive than heroin, you can get them addicted. I'm not talking about addicts. I'm talking about dealers. Dealers in death. Dealers that this body punishes less severely than a meth dealer or a crack cocaine dealer or a PCP dealer or an LSD dealer. What you allow is what will continue. I don't know if my bill will stop all the fentanyl dealers in America. I can't make you that promise. But if it'll sure as hell stop the dealer caught dealing, and that'll save lives. I agree with my good friend Senator Booker. I believe in justice. The definition of justice for some is complicated. I believe in the definition that was put forth, I think it was St. Augustine, who said, justice is when you get what you deserve. Justice is when you get what you deserve. And fentanyl dealers deserve, yes, a special place in hell. But they sure deserve to be punished more severely than dealers of less dangerous drugs. Thank you, Mr. President.